Your last time.
Okay, I'm gonna call this October 6th meeting of the Planning Commission's work session to order. And I guess we're gonna be reviewing chapter 2, 3, and 4. I had another comment, but now I forgot it and I didn't write it down, so.
You'll come back.
It looks like we have a handout here. Kurt,
We have a PowerPoint.
you did some homework?
Yes. Yes. Is everybody not gonna hand out?
You guys have, you all have, what is this related to?
Perfect. It's the presentation of it
For what?
today. Chapters 2, 3, and 4.
It's 2, 3, and 4. Oh, okay. I just saw it started out with chapter 4, so.
Well, chapter 4 is kind of the main part, so I figured I'd start talking about that. Because that's the way the design standards are. So I think what you have before you is a number of revisions that went beyond what was given to city council like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. It's hard to tell at this point. And I'll kind of get into why kind of thinking about all this, but Kim, walk us all hold on. We just literally just started. So yes, so chapter 4 is design standards. Obviously, that's like a core portion of the code for our base code. And I think has made some additional suggestions. So we're at the beginning of this, right? So we're kind of just pitching some ideas, pitching some code edits for you to contemplate, and I'm sure we'll go through them all, and maybe some additional things will come up. At the end, there's a parking lot that I had some extra things that I didn't put into the code, but I'm sure you all have a ton of extra parking lot items. And also you got the packet, I think, from Mr. Trask there, if you want to talk about his items. We put them in the packet for you, so everybody should have them. But there's 3, I guess, big concepts here for at least the chapter 4 requirements that kind of came up with aesthetic harmony. So kind of trying to harmonize all of our requirements so they're not, they're not in that they all work together in concert with each other. I think that's really what we're trying to accomplish here. Having some design flexibility. So again, you'll have a lot of new, as the design review board and the planning commission, it's giving you a lot of discretionary guidelines and additional things that you can use to approve projects in the code. So that's the goal here with these additions. And then I think one of the big things is adding diversity and kind of, I guess they call it scale management, but I think from some of the developments we've seen. Sure. From some of the developments we've seen go up that people are not. We haven't been getting a lot of praise for them. Of course, those happened before you were all seated, happened before all our staff was up here. But they've been built lately, and I think, some concerns are monotonous style development. But, everything doesn't really have a view for character. It looks somewhat institutional, or, it just doesn't look, doesn't have a lot of character. And in the case of apartment complexes, that would be every apartment building is the same. Also kind of trying to enhance like the neighborhood identity, create a better neighborhood. And just kind of getting away from like that commercial and kind of corporate or track build subdivision kind of architecture. So that's kind of what I think about with monotonous development. I think of a track builder for a single family home. I think of like a for apartments, you've got plenty of examples here of monotonous apartments that have just gone up I don't think, you can pick any one of them. You know, for commercial, I think you can see that as well. You know, you can see some buildings that just really have blank walls that look very corporate, don't look unique, and, don't really do much for the city or for design. I think, so that's the goal with all three of these things. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
I just had a question about that last one.
Sure.
You know, there are a lot of constraints in our code historically. You know, about colors, about fenestration, about, you know, a lot of these things that certainly impact the designs that have come about in the last few years. So is there a thought about maybe loosening some of those requirements or providing alternatives right in the code to achieve, you know, if diversity is a goal, which it surprises me that it is, frankly, based on a lot of the code provisions we have right now. You know, that might be helpful to approach it that way. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, you know, with the discretionary, I think this is a good, you know, this is a good starting point is, you know, where do we go from here, right? You know, I think everybody can agree that monotonous development and being kind of boxed in with the code with prescriptive requirements doesn't create good design. Right? And so how do we go from here? And I don't think anybody's really too thrilled with a lot of the development that's been going on in the last few years. And so how do we put in the code both the discretion and some different requirements so we don't keep, you know, producing the same result? And I think that's what trying to go for. And of course, this is just a first draft, right? So I'm sure we'll have lots of ideas, and that's the whole point of this is we got a draft and we can go from here and kind of think maybe other ways too. So that's a good point about that. And I think we'll get to that, especially with the parking lot, some ideas. But some major changes. So T3 had an exemption for all design requirements, which I think didn't make a lot of sense to me, to be perfectly honest with you, especially for T3, which is supposed to be a denser district. So, you know, if we're talking about a tract built subdivision, which there's a example of what happens when they have no design requirements, that it's almost built right now. I won't name it. You know, exempting it maybe doesn't produce the best design result. So, you know, I think what we're proposing is just having all of the regular transect requirements, like the building materials, that kind of thing, apply, like column windows. Because they're not too prescriptive, especially for just a single family house, but they do allow, you know, they do produce a little bit better of a building for a builder to kind of require a builder to build. And so that's kind of an idea. Also adding, you know, we had a lot of discussion about, and what we're going to see probably in a few months is buildings where we've zoned the property. I know we talk about this all the time. And I know members of the DRB talk about it, where we've zoned the property a high density district and there's nothing else around it. And someone wants to build a large scale or a very dense residential development or 4-story apartments, 5-story apartments, you know, just trying to add some extra requirements to that, but also trying to have like an architectural theme for developments as well. So just a little more discretion that you'd be allowed. Trying to simplify the frontage types. So the forecourt is not common in any architectural style around here, and it was kind of abused, I think, from some of these older projects. From what I understand from talking to Jeremy about this, that and it's the DRB spent a lot of time with it, but you don't see any forecourts anywhere in Charleston or Savannah for the most part, or here. And so, since it was abused, why should we continue with it? Also, the arcade is not really, which is arcade is where you have the building actually above the walkway. Because I think there's only one example of it. It might be in this room, but it's also just not something we see very often in the city. So why allow it? Trying to get rid of that. With single family standards, you know, trying to ask for four-sided design. Have a garage limitation because, we don't want garages, I think, as we're talking about the, previous subdivision, we're trying to get away from the track build subdivision, so. Essentially, what's being proposed here, as you can see in your packet, is additional design standards just for specific uses, because that's how it's laid out in your code. So if you go to the staff report, you can see where all these are. But we'd be adding some new architectural standards that basically say that you have to have basically four-sided architecture, that corner lots require some additional design requirements. That the roof lines and material and massing have to kind of, they just, we're trying to get away from that track build style. That the garage, basically can't, for the most part, be in the front with the 30% maximum setback, but it could still be like a side loaded garage, like you see in some older subdivisions that were built, maybe in before the 60s, where you have kind of a side loaded driveway. Everybody can envision that. So that would prevent that track build subdivision from being built. When you were in chapter 7, there were a lot of things that were implying you had to do a rear loaded house, but they didn't really require it. Require a smaller driveway, they didn't really require it, and then you get, kind of a track build subdivision. So the goal is to try to prevent that from happening. And then, kind of looking at front yard landscaping, we've gotten complaints on landscaping for some of those subdivisions and how and the builders are putting it in. Since we're kind of silent on landscaping, at least if we had a standard up front, I think it would be helpful to the residents who are kind of at the mercy of builders for some of the landscaping, and since we don't really, we're silent on it. So that's kind of the idea with single family standards. Multifamily changes, we're split between 2 and 3 unit houses, so a duplex and a triplex. A row home, but we added townhouses because there's been some confusion that you remember at the hearing that you had opposite from the hospital, where people thought row homes and townhouses were different things. In our code, they're pretty much the same thing. We just want to specify that they're the same thing. And then apartment houses, but these are some big changes. So this would be requiring that you have to have different floor plans and elevations depending on the size of your development. Also, the detached garages would have to be different. So, it's really trying to prevent that monotonous kind of Soviet style architecture for apartments, or that's what I call it. For row homes and townhouses, I think it also produces that. If you remember when you had that hearing opposite the hospital, you had a lot of questions about the design and architecture. Well, if we put in the code that if you have X number of buildings, you have to have at least 2 or 3 distinct designs. I think you're basically setting the expectation up front, and you're also, not creating a monotonous, unattractive kind of subdivision. So, you're kind of killing both birds with the same. And then when we go to chapter 2, I'll show you that there'll also be lot diversity standards. So there'll be two portions of this, right? And I'll explain that a little better as well. But I think the concern you had when those townhouses came before you is that, hey, I don't know what these townhouses are going to look like. The developer said, well, I don't have to tell you right now, essentially, right? And I can't really design for that. And your concern was, how do I approve this without knowing? But if we already put in the code the expectation that they have to have different designs, they need to design those up front before they get your approval. So it gives you a lot of discretionary power as well. But it also, I think, makes for a much better looking subdivision. Same with 2 and 3 unit houses, and I think adding the 18-inch elevation requirement, can maybe consider it for single family. It just adds a lot of cost, but I mean, slab on grade single family houses are not terribly attractive, but they do add cost. So that's something to consider. But the two and 3 unit houses would have the same kind of diversity requirement. So again, depending on the size, I think it's 5 acres. You've got to basically have a diversity of floor plans and elevations. Design types. Does this make sense to everybody? So this is, something other communities are doing.
So,
And
on that last one, you say even for 2 and 3 unit houses, did you just say that you can't have a duplex with matching size?
no. If you did like a whole subdivision, I don't think this will come up with that very often, but it could. You could have an all duplex development. In fact, there was one proposed here, I think 5 or 6 years ago, but if they did like X number, whatever it is in the code, certain acreage, you would have to have, they couldn't just be duplicated the same,
So it'd have to be different designs between buildings.
between the building, not just the 2 duplexes itself, but between, each 2 or 3 unit building. Each unit, I guess, that's what to say. Does that make sense? Okay. Kind of adding some commercial, really, I think the big thing was wall articulation, so. Really trying to look at the uninterrupted length of walls, facade treatments, vertical window proportions. Liner buildings was something that we thought that should be mandatory in RMX. And also, we're proposing maybe a 2-story requirement, also the depth of it. We've talked a lot about the 25-foot depth. And for attached as well, so kind of reducing the attached depth, so you could do like a false front, but keeping the 25 foot minimum depth for actual detached liner building, so it can be usable. Again, you can look at, I'm just trying, this is just an overview to try to, this was a very complicated situation with well, it's kind of now a business center that's being built right now. It looks really nice, I will say, but it was extremely difficult because they had to add the 25 foot of liner building to the site, basically the whole structure for the code as an attached building, which didn't really make, I think, a lot of sense for us from a design perspective that, they basically had to build themselves office use that they might not be able to rent out because it's super active. Whereas we think that, it might be better just to allow the designer to be creative with that. So we don't have that requirement. So that's just a thought, or to go with a 2-story requirement for the liner building. The whole idea, if you look at Buford Station, is to kind of buffer the back and the parking and create a more urban looking environment. And also with RMX, if we're gonna go this form-based code, every time we go to RMX, we're basically just exempting out the whole purpose of the code. So what's, and RMX and T5 are in the same district, which we'll get to later. But it just doesn't make a lot of sense to have a 1-story liner building. I know Paul might disagree, but anyway, so those are some thoughts. Changing the large footprint building down to 10,000 square feet. I mean, it could be 15,000 square feet, but it has enhanced requirements. But the thought being is you changed everything to 10,000 square feet for planning commission. That's like the trigger for a lot of buildings and site plans. So why not use the large footprint? Because it's a decent sized building, and like Aldi, for example, was like under 20,000 square feet, just barely. So they're just kind of trying to take out the exemption. We talked a lot about materials and window updates. So tabby, like the fake tabby, is something that is not really desired, just because it's rarely done well. And right now it's an allowed material type. Vinyl windows on contributing structures in the historic district would be, I think, the design manual really, or the preservation manual is very explicit on, that should never happen, but it would just be easier if you just prohibited in the material section for contributing structures, so we don't have to worry about this. But that's just a suggestion. One big issue that I think we found here is the transparency requirement is transparency. And I don't think of windows as transparency, I guess. But so we redefine that definition to really say fenestration. non-transparency to require a 6 foot clearance behind the glass to kind of just really, to make it really clear to that you can use spandrel glass as well. Also, you know, for the internally lit, if you're gonna put on the big glass, that it has to have, you know, has to have internal illumination. Right, so it's not just a blank, you know, like empty vortex of the way at night of a fake window. It's just really dark. So those are all some changes that we are proposing. Different window sizes, adding the Muntin requirement for windows larger than 2 feet in any direction. And also adding that they must use exterior applied muntins and interior spacer bars or SL lights or true divided lights in the historic districts. That comes up all the time. So these are some changes that we were thinking about with chapter 4. We did talk, you know, we came up with these in concert with the Metters, who's been kind of doing the design for the last 6 or 7 years, and there's a lot of things that I think that, you know, that we've seen that cause problems like the forecourt and some of these window changes. A lot of changes, I think the planning staff wanted, you know, with the diversity and some of the architectural design standards. But also in the beginning, it was also, there's a kind of a statement in the beginning, chapter 4 applicability section that gives a lot of discretion that says, I'll just go through it. The goal with that, and I'll get to this later, is to kind of have more vernacular architecture, and that's something we're gonna put in the parking lot. But something we got from Mount Pleasant, it's called local design quality on page 9 of 43, 4.5.1. And it states that structures that are of symbolic design for reasons of advertising, corporate identity, corporate continuity are highly discouraged. However, the design review body staff may work with applicants to incorporate limited signature design elements into buildings to allow recognition of certain corporate or signature identity while still retaining the ability to achieve a project design unique to the city of Newburgh. Similarly, prototype architecture is prohibited. However, the design review body or staff may work with applicants to incorporate limited signature design elements into buildings to allow recognition of certain corporate signature identity while still retaining the ability to achieve a project design unique to Newburgh. So I think that's kind of harkening back to what Kim was talking about, is we want to kind of prohibit the corporate architecture, but we do want to allow you and staff to have some flexibility with it. Does that make sense? And I think as we get into the parking lot, you know, do we want to start going into maybe design guidelines and using more of a vernacular architecture for design? That's just a thought, but I didn't go all the way there because that's a big deal. All right, chapter 2, which is lot standards. I'm so sorry I went out of order, but the design seems to really kind of predicate the 2 and 3 strangely, so because it's a form-based code. Chapter 2 standards are really like kind of like the lot, you know, like your setbacks and that kind of thing. We're really proposing too many things with this because, you know, it's based on the typical form-based code, which is T1 to T5, and, you know, obviously other city have further with that, but you know, so we weren't trying to go too far with that, but T3S was something that has been identified as needing a change. So I think everybody's aware that lots are industry-wide, nationwide, are getting smaller for a variety of reasons, you know, cost and the cost to develop a lot. Household sizes decreased, right? People don't want to maintain a big yard anymore. But, you know, these spectral developments, lots are small, and it doesn't matter if you're here or, you know, on Walla Walla, they're a smaller lot, right? And so, you know, it would be reducing the lot size from 9,000 to 6,000 square feet and 45 to 30. I mean, increase right to 45%, so you can have a lot in a house. Yes. So, does that make sense to everybody? We added an open space requirement T5 UC, so we'd be kind of reducing their build out to 90%, so you can fill up the whole single lot with building. So, again, we had like 5 or 10% lot open space requirement now in T5 UC, so it'd be consistent with that. And I mean, I think that shouldn't be too much of a problem because, T5 UC is not really found downtown. That's all T5 DC, right? And so there should probably be a little bit of open space, a little bit of greenery, I think, in those lots. I don't know that we want them completely full. Detached garage, this has come up a lot with planning staff, is that we have like a 20-foot setback for a detached garage behind the facade of the building. It's just come up a lot with building placement, so still allow that side loaded garage style I was talking about. It's like the 20-foot has come into some problems, especially for some corner lots and some other issues. So we're still, if we do the 30%, we're basically only allowing a car garage. And it's still behind the house. So I think we're kind of, but yet this gives the citizen or the designer a little more flexibility with that 20-foot standard. We strangely are like the only code I've ever worked under that doesn't have an encroachment for an HVAC unit, and this comes up a ton, right? We have smaller lots now. And you would be surprised how many builders just throw it there. Until then we have to work it out later because that's, it's a different contractor. That makes sense in a lot of buildings to put it on the side, right? But with no encroachment ability, 5-foot setback, it's a problem, right? It's a problem. And so I'm proposing that there could be up to 3-foot encroachment for an HVAC unit on the side or the rear, in the case that you have a small rear, just to.
Encroaching on somebody else's property.
No encroaching on the setback. So a setback, a lot of our districts have like a 5-foot side setback. And so that's very common. And so you can encroach up to 3 foot. So it'd still give you 2 foot. Plus the other person, if they had a 3-foot setback, it'd still give a 4 foot. So there'd still be room, which we wouldn't want both of them right next to each other, but there'd still be room to maintain your garage. And to be honest with you, it's happened in a lot of, it's not like the one track build stuff. It's happened a lot of times where the HVAC contractor just throws it in there and then dealing with it later, trying to figure out how to make it work. So just because they're so used to doing that. And then we removed the fencing standard because fencing was as an encroachment. It didn't make any sense. We did a whole new fencing requirement in chapter 5. So we're just removing all of stuff. Yeah, and then so housing diversity, which is kind of different than the design diversity. So what I'm pitching to you is 2 separate things. And there's a lot of things to talk about with this. One, the design diversity in chapter 4 would say, hey, if Bill wants to build, Bill's got 10 acres and he wants to build a new apartment complex. He wants to build 24 4-unit 4-story apartment complexes. He's got to have like 4 different unit types and floor plans. So it's going to really that's really going to create a lot of design changes to that. Whereas with lot diversity, what we're saying is that if you have, and it goes by acreage, it's something that I used in my former city that we got from Fort Collins. I think it's a really good idea. And it's basically saying that you can only have certain lot types. So it's creating a mixed use subdivision. So if you have over 5 acres, you have to have 2 types of housing or use types. I shouldn't put housing use types, I'm sorry. So you do apartments, you got to have 30% has to be like townhouses or commercial. If you do 10 acres, then you got to have 3. So you got to have, basically, it could be single family homes, it could be townhouses, it could be apartments. If you go up to 20 acres, you have to have 4. So 30% has to be a mixture of something. So and it scales both ways. So, if you're building all apartments, which, is usually more of your lower end, right? Then you're going to have to build some higher end price points, create a mix of use, either commercial or townhouses or houses. And when you go to the higher end, if you're going to build only like, single family detached or really high end like townhouses or something like that, then you're going to have other lower end, units kind of mixed in, if you have a large enough development. Does this make sense to everybody? So the goal is to create like a city, essentially, is if we're moving out or we're doing infill, we're not just creating pockets of apartments or pockets of just single family houses for larger development. We still do it for infill. So that's kind of the goal. I know it was working where I was before actually quite well, where we were doing a lot of subdivisions.
No, I think this is an interesting or good idea, but then as I was going through and reading code, I got to the matrix of zoning. Started looking at the different zoning areas, having to try and apply this. Starting to become problematic a little bit, and I think the language here is a little confusing because you're led to believe that you can do commercial and residential areas in order to achieve diversity or something, so I think. I think we have to be careful how we do this, but
This
I
is,
think it's a good idea.
this is, I'm sure we would look at that for T3, there's only or maybe we just exempt out T3 because it's not really allowing much, or maybe you consider adding like a duplex to T3. That's a thought, but for your T4, your T5 subdivisions, I think it makes a lot of sense, or your RMX subdivisions, because I think from my standpoint, a lot of problems, this is just personal planning opinion, is that I think we're trying to create an urban fabric, and an urban fabric is not 300 units of 4-story apartments, or for that matter, or 300 single family detached houses, on 50 acres. That is not creating an urban fabric at all. And so this is, and we also see we have a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, and creating a mixture of uses within a subdivision, and creating those mixtures of price points, I think is a positive thing.
And just thinking about this, and maybe the size limit takes care of this, but I represent a lot of multifamily clients, and they, different types of housing in a single complex can create impediments to investment and financing and resale. So, there's a different type of investor for an apartment complex that is for, say, a mobile home park or, some kind of single family home residential unit. Would it be possible for the developer to, let's say they want to do a 20-acre development? Can they split it out somehow?
That's what would
to
happen.
overcome
That's what
those-
happened. They would phase it out. They would do like a preliminary plat and have like 4 or 5 or 6 different phases. Yeah, and like you'd have a phase for probably apartments and a phase for townhouses or a phase for.
But it would still be under, let's say they want to sell off the apartments.
Yeah, it would be a whole.
Would they have to subdivide?
They would probably have that as a parcel by unto itself, right?
Okay.
So again, that's an idea. I know it's working in other jurisdictions. They've used something like this, but this is just an idea. From me to work on, some of the problems I see, which is like, right, we're getting these massive developments that are just like kind of unto themselves, right? And that's just not helping anything. It's not creating this urban form that we're trying to get at. So. Yeah, it's just an idea. And it's only would be triggered if you had bigger development. So you could phase it out. If you're doing infill, it wouldn't matter. That's that. Again, these are just ideas. I'm just throwing out a bunch of ideas for you, just giving you the overview. Height transition. This is kind of similar to the other discussion, but this goes back to the townhouses that you heard earlier this year, right? Where you had a perfect example of this, where you had single family suburban next to something that was zone T5 UC. Because it was on the network too there. So obviously there's a disconnect when you have a a 5-story building that's allowed next to a 1-story, like 14-foot high house, right? And that doesn't seem right, right? We have nothing really in our code to address that, so, one idea is to do like a transition zone. You kind of did that, but you didn't have the power to do it, you did it in a discretionary way, so this would be doing it in the code. I found 75 feet in another district, so that's where I got the graphic from, but that's the idea. So if you're in any of these districts that can go higher, like T4, T5, RMX, you have a 75-foot transition area where basically you take the average height before you can go all the way up to your. I mean, the picture shows it pretty well before you can go all the way up to the height allowance in the district. Stepping so as not to create this, wall of urban height next to a single family house. That makes sense. Okay. So again, this goes back to that, we were talking about harmony and giving you some tools in your toolbox. So yeah, these changes are kind of trying to create those diverse housing options. Trying to create streetscapes. I think I was trying to talk about the harmony and the height. I think part of that is that it's a little more equitable. I think, especially when we're looking at both of these things. It's the height of the building. I don't think that's very fair to have a 5-story building, family house next to you. That's not good planning, I would say. That it doesn't seem very fair to people. And then another big thing is the overlay standards. We're in chapter 2, which make a lot of sense because it's a zoning overlay. It's not a lot standard overlay. So I was proposing to move the overlay standards to chapter 3, which is zoning, which is the next. Which doesn't, which could have a lot of things to it. Again, this is just a draft. This is just we'll talk about all this stuff. I'm sure a lot of different things will come out of our discussion or code requires. And this is just a first staff and some changes. So,
You get the buttons.
yeah, well,
That's called.
it's a trail scene.
You left them there when you came.
I know. So T4NA, which is the trails, that's why I don't have this slide. Doesn't really have a table of uses in it. It's kind of embedded into the use standards. And so there's this district called T4NA, which is kind of like an overlay district, but it's not in the overlay standards, but it's a specific set of, so it just felt like it would be better that we just have its own, be added to the table with all of its uses. So it's just, there's not a ton of properties, but it's over by the kind of the depot. Everybody knows where that is. Just kind of adding that in. And so that would be one thing, just because when it comes, it's almost impossible to deal with as a staff person. Just because it's not clear. It's in like the specific use requirements and they're not clear. Two things that I think have come up since I've been here, that I have concern about is adding basically animal hospitals and kennels, and this is the same thing as the T4N and self-storage. So if you go to the use chart, the table of chapter 3, they're not there. And so if you look into the design standards of the uses, there's some references to both of them, like that they're, specific references to like T5 UC for self-storage and for animal hospitals, but that's it. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense why you'd want an animal hospital or an T5 UC or a kennel, which requires like an outdoor, kind of like yard for the animals to run around in, or why you would want self-storage and what you're proposing is like your dense urban environment. That's just, storage really they're obviously needed in areas, but they take up a lot of space. They don't really have high tax. They have very low tax revenues. They produce no employment. So it's really, and it's been considered like kind of a transitional use to a higher end use, that's how it used to be marketed, like, you could build the self-storage, it's all upfront cost, and then, as this, neighborhood kind of improves and commercial real estate becomes more, attractive, then you can, but actually the self-storage is so profitable and has, that we're just losing whole cores. I think you can see that in Port Royal especially, to kind of a not terribly attractive or, a use that really produces any economic benefit to the city. And so, thought was just to take both of these out and put them in that table and then kind of require them as conditional uses only in districts. So animal hospitals, I think, should be only allowed in RMX and LI. Because, they need outdoor area and there's parking or smells, like, do you really want that in an urban setting? I don't think you do, that's just me. That's just that recommendation, and then self-storage, I think that should be conditional in RMX, where you can make it work as part of a development. I think you can see that can happen, pretty easily. As an existing use in T4NA, where there's a lot of warehouse buildings down there, honestly, a lot of metal buildings, and then basically permanent also in an industrial district where you don't have a ton of industrial though. But taking out the five UC, which you're trying to get density, you're trying to get commercial. It's in all of our main corridors, it just doesn't seem like we want to turn this into self-storage.
Yeah, what's your thoughts about just not allowing self-storage anywhere in the city?
I think you have to have every use, this is it's a use that's needed. You gotta have it somewhere. It's just like adult entertainment. You have to allow adult entertainment somewhere. Right? There's a bunch of restrictions on it, but there has to be some district to be allowed. That's the way I understand it. You can make it really difficult, but we don't really have a ton of LI, and I think RMX, if you screen with liner buildings, I mean, it would be attractive, it would, I think, detract from anyone. Still have that commercial area required. That's just the staff level opinion. Split zoning, I mean, we kind of touched on this before. I don't honestly know that split zoning is legal, but really need to talk to the attorney about that. But we have this RMX/T5 UC district on a lot of the main corridors. It's been challenging in the past. I think you're all aware of that, where it's been gamed by the developer or staff even, I'll be honest, there hasn't been any clear guideline. The developer the T5, it allows that urban development, so it allows very little, have half of the parking is required, but it'll require a lot more of the design, with fenestration, the building material, the length of the building, right? But the RMX doesn't require that, but then it allows, the use or the lesser design standards. So what's been happening from the past is people have picked and choose, which we haven't been allowing the last 2.5 years, but there's nothing really in the code that says anything about this. Like, for example, there's some of those hotels up there that have been built on RMX design standards and then T5 UC lot standards. Now, does that make sense to anybody? It doesn't make sense to me, but that's how they got approved. So they have basically substandard parking and lesser design, so they, have that more corporate architecture. Doesn't make any sense to me, so we have to do something about this. If, is it removing the mixed use, the split zoning? I propose like some code language where you have to pick one, and you have to pick T5 UC if there's urban blocks as identified by Appendix C, so you have to go T5 UC. I think, we're just trying to make this consistent, because doesn't make any sense the way we've got it. And I think from talking to people, I think it was decided that they used this because they wanted people to annex into the city, these corridors. They wanted to annex from the county, and they thought that the T5 might be too restrictive. That's why I understood why they went with the RMX, but Libby might have to answer. That's what I was told.
I think we've made it kind of clear that we don't want to, in the annexation cases, that we don't like to approve dual zoning going forward. I don't know if we can change the zoning map, which might be helpful.
Could recommend it.
But also I think that, as we need criteria for annexation in our code, which we do not have, we have to assign zoning when we annex something. And so I think we need criteria for assignment of zoning classifications as opposed to just our general dislike of dual zoning, that is not in the code.
This would have, some standards that you have to pick one or the other, and if you're next to urban areas, you have to pick
But I'm
something.
talking about for new,
Standards.
when somebody has an annexation petition, there should be criteria for the planning commission to recommend a zoning category.
Yeah, and I know that's on our parking list, and it's probably the last thing that we would work on, just because it's, as I think I sent over that legal thing. If there's in South Carolina, they don't really have a lot of. I know in other former states, there was pages of statutes on what, was needed for annexation, but in South Carolina, it's pretty.
It's pretty loose. That doesn't mean we couldn't have, criteria.
Yes, and I think that's gonna be our last set of things to do, probably chapter 8, unless you wanna put chapter 8 first. But two last, those are our and probably get a definition section too, but those are our last portions. Unless you wanna move it up, you can always move it up.
Well, we talked about that, we talked about, because we've already gone through chapter 8. And just got hung up on a few of the details, I think. I think we got some clarification on those. I think we could look at chapter 8, but since we've started with 2 through 4, I would think that maybe we could get through 2 through 4. What you've done here is a great start for us. Hopefully you all have read at least 2 and 3, maybe 4 at this point, but I think we can get through 2 through 4 in not too much time, but I guess we'll see today how far we get starting out with chapter 2.
So I talked about moving the overlays over into chapter 3 because they're zoning overs, right? So they're different. And so it just seemed like it would make more sense, but not changing the overlay. We'll get to the parking lot, but one thing we were thinking about, and I talked to the lead council about this, is conservation subdivision. I'm not sure anybody would use it as an overlay, but we do have an open space fund. And I talked to them and they are not gonna link up, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's okay, because that's what they do in a lot of places that have conservation subdivisions. We'll use the open space tax to basically buy the 80% or the 7% or the 60% open space, so it kind of subsidizes the conservation subdivision, but that's okay. But should there be someone that has a conservation focus, either with property in the city or with large tracts outside of the city, this could just be an option for them that they could come in and annex and preserve some land. So it's just we won't have to spend a ton of time on it, but the idea is that you cluster single family homes. It'd still be detached homes, right? So it'd still be kind of more rural in nature, but you'd be preserving either 80 or 70% of the land as a constant in perpetuity as an open space.
Could that constitute use diversity?
I think you just go to this overlay permanently. You wouldn't even have to worry about it. You'd be using this overlay. That would be the defining section. And then you could integrate with the trail, the Spanish Moss Trail. And then finally, and I'll shut up. Parking lot items, and I'm sure you all have a lot, but these were just the things that staff, and I should state that the changes were based on both Christopher kind of doing some research and being here, and me being here for 2.5. I'll be honest, when I started this in March, after I'd only been here a month and a half, it was a lot to take in, and I didn't really know all of the issues that the city was facing, and started this whole code thing, and I think I have a lot better handle on it. Also a lot better handle on the code, what needs to be changed. So me, and then, talking to others like, they've been handling the design, and I think we think that for the most part, you know, there's a lot of things that can work. It's just, we proposed are just the changes I think that we think can address most of the major ones. But anyway, you know, one of the big issues that's in the parking lot for me is, and I think also matters too, is vernacular architecture requirements. So I listed that one, you know, comment there that Mount Pleasant had, and they're kind of like the leader in that in the state, but, you know, how do we get more of a low country or a view for the architecture and get away from like the Carrington Manor that's open up? I'll just be honest, you know, how do we get away from that? Or the hotels that are right next to it, right? How do we make them look, you know, a little more that they fit in here, you know, is that a guideline that would be separate from this code where, you know, to Kim's point, you know, that it's not a prescriptive requirement, but you know, it's a set of guidelines where we maybe just have like 10 or 20 pages that we worked with an architectural firm or something, and it's kind of like the preservation manual where it's not specifically required, but we're guiding you in a direction of the design that there's an expectation for here. Now, of course, that creates more, you know, it's an extra cost, but I haven't heard anybody saying that they love that, you know, that hotel down the street or that architecture or that, you know, I haven't heard anybody say that. And, you know, some of these design things that can be added are not horrifically more expensive in cost either. So I just, you know, and again, you're giving a lot of density, you're giving a lot of setback, you know, in parking, you know, you wouldn't have in another city, right? So there's that. So that's something, you know, that would probably be independent of this, but I've tried to add a lot of design guidelines into the code. It's just, you know, can we get vernacular design guidelines? Because those become a little subjective, right? It's hard to put those prescriptively in a code. You know, T4N, you know, we've got a lot of T4N in areas where there's no development for the most part. And, you know, just a thought, I think those were supposed to be organized, but we weren't proposing to take this out, but should apartments be removed from that district? I don't know, it's just a thought, just because of where they are on the map, it's hard to make them work. I mean, I guess with a lot diversity it could, that's why I haven't changed it, but it's just a thought. I think one thing that's come up both with the city council and I think Mr. Trask has sent in is the 2-story requirement for major roads and intersections. This hasn't really come up lately, but if you go to Appendix C and if you really look at the code, certain there's like nodes, if you will, with your major intersections, they have to be 2 stories in the city. I think we're I think that staff thinks that's fine, to be honest with you. We don't propose removing it, but I think it's come up before that it's created kind of maybe a ridiculous result at times. So it's something to discuss, right? The drive-through requirement on Boundary Street, the restriction, I think that's also something Paul's been talking about, but you know, that's the whole RMX T5 UC debate. You know, there's a lot to talk about on this, you know, as our portions of Boundary Street urban. You know, I think we've kind of we've done a lot with the setback, the front, you know, with those major streets that we're basically now pushing everything back. So, you know, there's going to be a demand for drive-throughs in any major corridor that's car oriented, and you know, are we handling it okay right now? So that's just a item. Split zoning, which we talked about, and then I'm sure you guys have a lot of items that you want to add. So I'll shut up. Sorry, I just wanted to get like kind of an overview of everything. And, yeah, I'll shut up now.
I think you said we had in your parking lot also the overlay districts.
Well, yeah, I probably forgot to add that. You know, there's a few overlay districts with like the garden. I just didn't have time to do those, like the traditional neighborhood. It could use some revising.
I think we need to look at it.
Yeah.
I think that's more important, and especially as we're changing codes.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we overlooked, or we went straight to this without having our public comment. I think maybe somebody in the public that might want to make some comments. So let me go ahead and open it up to public comments now before we go any further.
I'm just listening, so.
Okay, you're good. Well, thank you very much and good afternoon. And so Paul Trent, I have really 4 points that I wanted to, have a conversation about. First of all, let me say I like so much about the Beaufort Code. I feel like the Beaufort Code is sort of going through growing pains. I kind of look back at the Boundary Street Master Plan that was adopted way before the Beaufort Code was developed. And the code, of course, was developed, at least with respect to Boundary Street, based on the Boundary Street Master Plan. And let me just say this, on some of these issues, I'm very, very happy to use my family's property as a case analysis. And so you can ask questions and I can answer them and I can go through in detail from the developer's side and from, the city side, exactly how these issues occurred and what the challenges were and what the challenges will continue to be. So I'm very happy to do that. I basically laid out, a question about, my 2-story analysis that I prepared for you. I have also suggested a setback, an additional 5-foot allowance for setback in T5UC. I have suggested why Boundary Street will remain an auto-centric corridor and is really not a pedestrian-oriented street, which is why so much of the code is written in a way as if it were, a downtown Beaufort street, for example, which it's really not. And so there's a planning and market, a bit of a dysfunction in my view. So my goal is to try to suggest some positive changes to the code that don't injure the character of our community, that make these things function a little bit better. I've done a case study on the South Atlantic Bank. And I mean, we can go through that. And so it wound up just in a nutshell. It was disapproved. Went to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which subsequently did approve it unanimously. And that had to do with a drive-through that circulated the building. And so I don't really know how to proceed. I really think maybe I should just answer questions as each of these issues. And Mr. Chairman, if you just want to, I don't know how you want to go through it, but I've got 2 in chapter 2, 1 in chapter 3, and 1 in chapter 4, where these issues really come up, these 4 points that I wanted to make. So.
Thanks. I guess I'd suggest that we just cover it individually as we get to each chapter rather than trying to go around. Get them all. Unfortunately, I did not receive his
I've got
comment.
extra copies that anyone needs.
Yeah, I got mine early and I didn't get it.
Okay.
So, sorry, I don't have it.
We're talking about the materials we're talking about are the ones that are attached to the email of September 29, is that correct?
But I think from the board's perspective, I'd rather not cover these as we hit each of the chapters. That's okay with the board. Okay. So, are there any comments from the board before we get started? Okay.
Let me just ask, your summary, Kurt, all of those things that are recommended as either changes to existing language or new language, new sections. Those are all in red, is that right? And
That's right.
and struck through. So what you were giving us was a summary of what is in red in chapters 2, 3, and 4. Okay.
Yeah, just kind of goes down where we.
Well, there was a lot there in your presentation, and so some big ideas, and some of the stuff is smaller. I think it's gonna take a while for us to go through. Some of the pages doesn't look like there's anything changed on it, then it
Yeah,
looks
some of
like
them-
some of them, for example, just page for page and struck through, and then it must be new stuff.
Did
in place of it.
Well,
Do you have the packet that had, each chapter I had
You have a red line.
I have a 3 or 4 page summary of all the things.
We don't have a summary, but we have the red lines of chapters 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, anyway.
No, I saw the overlay section go from one chapter to another, so I figured that's what was going on there.
Print that out.
I could figure that out.
Um,
But before you go, I just want to ask a question. You know, I was thinking a lot when you were talking about trying to make some of the corporate development that's taken place in the past look more like the Low Country going forward. And I thought about this building going up here on Boundary behind the Oasis Hotel. You know, and there's nothing in Low Country architecture that I'm familiar with that involves a 5-story building. And you don't have to answer me now, but as you were talking, I was just thinking, how do you make that look quote Low Country? I mean, do you put a 5-story porch on it? I just think that's a
No, I think
fascinating.
that's the challenge, like that's the challenge. And so, yeah. I don't know that you can.
Well, I'm just thinking of Charleston, and, when they built the new courthouse in Charleston, I think it's got 10 stories, but it's kind of crammed in there behind, the historic, actually really old buildings. And, there's features of the outside of it that make it look less, domineering. In fact, when I first went to the courthouse in Charleston, I couldn't even find it. I had to ask somebody, where is the actual courthouse? There are ways to do it depending on where you're putting it. Now, the Oasis Hotel isn't gonna hide much, and I don't know if that would qualify as a historic building, but, there are other places where it probably could be done quite artfully.
In the case of the Carrington, I guess we shouldn't be using that. I think what we're seeing, and I think maybe Libby has brought it up. Is it okay if I read everybody's first name? Well, I just said, is that, I think in the case that you're seeing with us, and you need a good staff and you need a good planning commission to handle this code. And I think when you see that you don't have experienced people handling it, you get something like that. Where I think there's ways that it could have been softened, it could have been. Does it have to be Low Country, or is there things you could do with the scale and the massing and the height? Is that really appropriate, the 5-story building right there? I think these questions need to be had, does this really meet all of these standards? And I think that's the core of this code. It's like, there's a lot of. There's that, right? There's this, you need some experienced people both approving these things and reviewing them. You don't, you get a bad result. That's just an opinion on it, but I think you can see what happens. Because it's, right.
As an architect, I've done for over 50 or 60 years, historical architecture and new architecture in historical locations. And it comes down to the ability of the architect to really comprehend the environment and design appropriately within that environment. And I've had designers that wanted to do contemporary design for buildings, courthouses in different locations. And not to put leg harnesses on my architect, I've allowed them to move forward with trying to do a contemporary design inside of a historical area, like, and I'll use Dare County, North Carolina as the example, one example. And I've been all but thrown out of the conference room by the councilman and basically the people putting up the funding for most of that stuff. And had to come back with another architect, designer that I knew did more traditional work, but traditional in the sense that it contemplated the architecture based on the location. It's really hard to sit down and write a code that's going to say how to do certain things. We don't want to do a prescriptive code of how to. I think in large part, we can probably use examples. And we can write codes that encourage certain things, discourage other things. I've done that as I've sat on other boards. But I think we have to decide what that vernacular is that we think is important here. And then go forward with that vernacular. I've had discussions with HBF about some of those issues. And some of those things that I think are appropriate vernaculars, they would discard. But I think we have to be more independent. I think we have to be inclusive at the same time, but we have to also be independent when we go through the codes and do those. And those are a lot in chapter 4 that we're dealing with. So Benji, I don't know, you're an architect, so what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, vernacular to me is, like certain elements of a building. So for example, like a front porch, that's a vernacular. Low country, deep overhangs, that's vernacular, to protect, back in the days to protect open windows from storms and rain. So I think if you put like those elements into, it'll be challenging to put in a 5-story building, but it's not impossible, I don't think. I mean, we don't design 5-story buildings, and we do single family residential, but if you put kind of these concepts like porches and roof forms and balconies and basically open spaces like a dog trot, I think those elements would be kind of my vernacular.
Yeah, I don't think we can be too prescriptive.
Right.
I think we have to show what the intent is of what we're trying to accomplish. And I think we can show examples, and we may decide that we want to have examples as part of our code that people can look at to start to get an idea. Because, when we've had people that are applying for permits and they say, well, I don't know what kind of architecture you want or what we're trying to do. They figure it out pretty quick and come back with things with a vernacular that are appropriate for our community. So I don't think it's a secret what we're looking for, but I think we put together the parameters appropriately so that they're not too prescriptive.
And that's why I was
show
suggesting the
what-
design guideline, because it would be like the preservation manual, so it would be a separate document that's not prescriptive, but it's basically giving a guideline of how, here's the forms, here's the architectural kind of that we're recommending.
Well,
Here's
here's,
that's a
here's
separate.
what I think, I've represented all of the national, virtually all of the national developers. You can think of from the Walmarts, the Walgreens, all the major apartments, all the home builders, TR, Pulte, 40 years I've done all of them. And they will design to a vernacular. they resisted greatly. But now that isn't to say that all of them, have thought it all through to the level, for example, of Walmart. I've told some of you this story about earlier in my career when Global was going through this thing where it thought that it could force everybody into a particular design that was different for every particular site, whoever was sitting on the planning commission at a given point in time. It was very challenging for a lot of developers to know what was the planning commission looking for at that particular time. But on one occasion, where we got into this just really extensive, trying to figure out what we wanted. They showed me that they said, here's 6 different boards. They had them with them in the trunk of the car. One of their design team came in one time. They said, what do you want? You want the Rocky Mountain version? You want the Low Country version? Do you want the Main Street America version? They literally had 6 different boards, and they started, each of those I think had 6. You know, at the very bottom was like the lowest level of design, and then the top was the top level of design. So that was 36 different versions of a Walmart. And of course, you know, they wanted to do the lowest level of one of these, you know, but not put them all out there for the community to choose. You know, you choose who you are. And eventually we got around to choosing that we were sort of Main Street Louisville kind of version. We weren't obviously Low Country Rocky Mountain. And then I got arguing, you know, which one are you going to force them to do along this continuum? Walgreens doesn't have that, but you can go around the country and you can see different Walgreens, you know, and same with CVS, but they're going to stick to their main corporate logo. Now, when you start trying to change their colors, as we started doing for a period of time in Louisville, where they said, well, we don't like blue, you know, as the color of Walmart, let's make it green. And, you know, they'd have the reason for making it green, and Walmart's going to that. You know, you cut through all the rest. I mean, that is our color. So Culver's is a good example. I know Culver's real well, and Culver's is a very nice new restaurant. But I don't think that Culver's has more than one version of that Culver's store. Now, could you have gotten them to do a more Low Country version if you didn't think that one was Low Country enough? I don't know, but I know you can with McDonald's, you know. So I think the whole idea of picking a vernacular is a good idea, whether it's single family housing. But I think the idea of having sort of pictures is probably the best way. And as long as we on the planning commission don't get so nitpicky that, you know, every meeting is, we got 7 different planning commissioners, we got 7 different opinions, that becomes impossible for these architects. Because I've been there at thousands of these meetings where I wasn't the architect, but I will tell you what always would happen. They would always shrink into their chairs, and I'm the guy that's having to defend this thing, and it gets to the point where I'd say I feel like I'm a carpet salesman, you know, because, you know, I'm just flipping through samples and saying, just tell me what color you want, you know, what kind of style you want. And we got to get to the point where if we come up with that vernacular, we're flexible enough that we don't nitpick these guys to death, you know, because that just drives these 2 architects and all the people like them, where they're crazy, they can't ever satisfy us. But I think that we should, I think we're all sort of the opinion from seeing some different things. We want people to build to what our vernacular is here, right?
You know,
With some flexibility, and that requires us to be a little bit flexible so that these guys, we don't have 7 different opinions or more, because we're gonna get opinions from the audience always as well. And I think it can work. So you call them guidelines, call them standards, but in the end, because we now have under chapters 7 and 9, we're involved in site plan review, which involves an architecture review. Give them enough guidance, and then we let the architects do their job, and we don't try to be personally, every one of us individually satisfied. As long as it's sort of satisfied our code requirements, that ought to be enough. But it's going to require us to come up a little more detail probably.
But the detail is going to be especially helpful to staff, because we don't really want to see these things until they're, you know,
Yeah.
basically compliant with the code, you know? We shouldn't be in a situation where we would have 7 different opinions, because that should have been sorted out before it gets to us.
That's what we're doing now. I can tell you that, Christopher can definitely tell you, I'm pretty hardcore on that, but the developers are not too thrilled about that because they're used to just throwing up whatever they want and getting their opinion on it.
Well,
We're saying no, you need to review all this.
But I can tell you that the staff is a key element, and just like you said. This, and I want to go back to Alfred only because, just to set the stage, when I first arrived at Alpharetta, the historical downtown area, the courthouse where I first went to present my plans for a project was the upstairs of a pharmacy downtown. And if you take that from 30 years ago now, you fast forward that and you take all of the things that were put into the code and the staff that really enforced with the developers what was going on, what the intent was before they ever got to the planning commission. You take a look at Alpharetta, what it looks like now and its growth, and you've got 6 and 4, 5, 6-story buildings. You've got new courthouse, new libraries, all the buildings in the downtown area, almost all new apartment complexes, but they're all done in a vernacular that was set 30 years ago and has now developed into what it is now. And it's a tremendous example to be able to see what setting the direction and then having the staff to maintain that, because the boards change all the time. Usually the staff is more consistent than anything else.
Well,
So,
I mean, I think that, as I started this, I think there's a few options here, you know, we can add a little more vernacular into the descriptive, it's hard to prescriptively design buildings, right? And so the other option, you can add a little more to that. The other option is maybe to consider doing guidelines based on the unit types that you already see on the design in chapter 4. That could be your recommendation, and I think we probably need to get a little funding for it, but we could probably put together like something and then have it approved by the planning commission and the city council, just like the preservation complex. And then you'd have like a guidebook, you know, if I want to build an apartment complex, here's what I need to do for a 3 or 4-story building apartment complex, and this is what we favor, right?
yeah,
This is what we like. It's just, I don't know how to, from a prescriptive standpoint, I don't know how far we can go with that. We can add.
Well, you
The idea of Benji had about, you know, like a list of things that are characteristics and then plus pictures.
We have to
I
have,
think you can do
we have
this.
to have
I
examples.
think I think pictures.
Pictures is what.
And I think they need to be part of the code. I'd say, you know, if it comes out to just this is what we like, then you get people saying, well, it's just what you like. I'm just not gonna do what you like. People do what they're required to do, but I'm talking about requirements that are flexible enough, so you can set forth the vernacular with pictures. And then, you know, you're gonna have some level of detail. I mean, are we gonna allow brick or are we not gonna allow brick? Are we gonna require it to all be, you know, lap siding, or is there different versions of siding that you could do? Do you allow horizontal siding? Do you allow horizontal on top of vertical? You know, those are some things that you can, you know, with some help of your architects, you know, can help you to just kind of do a little more definition to that, but then allow enough creativity in there, so that architects, you know, can still do their thing, and also so we can get redevelopment of areas that need redevelopment, and the areas that we want developed, you know, are gonna run people off entirely, you know.
We had a case in the design review committee where there was a bank going in on Boundary. And it looked like something from the the Astrodome. And we kept sending it to the female architect back. We finally told her to take a drive around Beaufort and figure out what the Low Country looks like, because she was from Atlanta. She had no idea it's right by where the dorms are.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Remember that
Remember that project, right? And she didn't have a clue. and go look, but if we had pictures and descriptions and verbiage in the code that explains what various columns are and material, we would have had a better chance, but it was multiple times that they came through, with bizarre, you know, Astrodome,
Yeah.
you know, type stuff.
Would have helped with the Aldi
Oh,
saga as well.
exactly. Oh, the Aldi's, we went back and forth with Aldi's on that design. We had nothing to compare it to. You gotta look like this Aldi's, or at least bring something in. It was very difficult.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the code is trying to suggest some of these elements of keeping it like human scale. But sometimes it doesn't always end up that way, where you'd have, you know, your front door with this 40-foot wall with no, you know, no awning or anything that would, you know, protect, no colonnade. So it's kind of, there's nothing that prohibits that or prevents that, I don't think. So that kind of ends up being approved. So I think things like that would be something, keeping it human scale would be something that we should think about.
This is all great. So I'm glad that everybody's on the same page. Do you think, so I'll throw it out there, it makes sense, most sense to me, instead of doing them as general design standards as they had it in the basically the code right now. As you can see, I added a lot of design standards to each use type to basically have these guidelines per use type. Does that make sense?
That's for what?
Per use guidelines. Because we already have like all the materials that you would ever use for low country, but they're so general, they're just a list, right? That's all. But if we had all the pictures and design guidelines for like, you know, for a row home, or a single family house, for an apartment, or a mixed use building, for a liner building. Large scale building or a civic building. Does that make sense? Is that okay?
Right.
Okay, well, you know,
Yeah, would something like this preclude the problem we had with the project opposite the hospital? Last week or, you know what I'm talking about, where he would not provide us with a design. And we were drawing on the, you know, drawing in the smoke.
yeah, you would be given that, and that's the whole point why I started, you
That's
know,
right.
basically one of the three main things was we're adding a lot of discretion. Your discretionary approvals are adding a lot of weight here now. So yeah, that's what we're trying to give you the tools to make it good. Yes. I think that's the whole goal, is to give a developer and the public and you and staff. You know, or there's an equation here, you know, like I have predictability, right? I know that if I do X, then I'm gonna get Y, right, every single time. Or at least I'm gonna get close to Y. I don't have to spend 3 years trying to get to Y and 3 planning commissions and 2 planning directors and the neighbor doesn't. If they're gonna do a 5-story building next to them, it's like, you know, character matters. No, it's good example. It's awful. Now that they put in the parking, it's like, oh my god.
Which one's he talking about?
Oh, the thing that's getting approved, right? They're getting built right now, the Carrington Manor, the 5-story. And
Assisted living spaces behind the Oasis in town.
And that's something also we should discuss. Is
There's
affordability.
there's anything wrong with it, you know?
There's affordability too that has to be thought about.
Definitely.
Because,
Definitely.
A weird like ramp going up to it, it looks like. It reminds me of Miami Beach. I mean, you know,
Well, there's some peculiar things about it, you know, like the lower level, some of them are gonna look right into the back of the Oasis Motel, which I don't know what those are gonna look like. Is that an apartment complex or is it an assisted, what did you call it?
no, it's like a 60.
It's a senior, it's a senior living, it's an affordable senior living.
Apartment.
so, because I mean,
Yeah.
over
It's
55,
not
as opposed to an ALF or
It's.
What's an ALF?
assisted.
Oh,
living.
You think
It's not a
it's
senior.
Yeah,
It's senior.
It's low income housing
It's,
type. Yeah, so there was a lot.
Oh, it's a lower income tax credit thing.
Well, I mean, that comes into play, we have to talk about it, it's in the air, right, is that, you know, there's a perception, especially with developers, you know, that if you keep adding all this stuff, increase the cost, right?
Oh, you do?
We have an affordability crisis, so I mean, I think we have to also, if we're gonna do this, we have to think about, you know, do we make the approval process easier for them, do we do a lesser standard if it's a really affordable project? I mean, that's something we need to think about, right? Because it's gonna come up, especially when you go.
Common area, it's looking at that.
Yeah, I don't know, how many units is that project, by the way?
It's not as many as you think, it's like 60 something. right?
No, it must be bigger than that.
Like 62, I mean 68, something like that.
The one behind the Oasis, only like 68 units?
Then there's the other one.
So I haven't cared.
Pintail Point, that's also, that's not, it's also income.
That's also.
It's not as many as you think for that either.
Yeah.
It's under 100.
That one is also under 100 units. Well, you're not gonna get amenities with that few number of units, you usually gotta get to the, my experience is you gotta get to the 250 plus to be able to get pool and clubhouse and stuff, they just can't make economic sense.
I mean, we could do something where we have like certain amenities are needed at certain size of development. And there's like.
I think we have to be
That's cost.
realistic with cost.
Yeah.
Well, they will do, they'll, once they get to a certain critical mass, they'll put them in. They wanna have them from a marketing standpoint, but you're not gonna get them in a small community, you're just not. You might in a condo community, but you're not gonna in a rental community. But I'm surprised they actually have some amenities on that pinpoint thing or whatever, Pintail Point or something. Don't they have a clubhouse and a pool in front?
They got a little.
They're required to have a tax credit project.
Oh, the
They get
tax credit
additional, I
requirement.
think, points.
Playground. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, they obviously getting economic incentive to do that, so they can do some things, maybe market rate can,
Well, I think you all should just think about, how do you make an affordable, it's gonna come up, so maybe there's like, easy approval process, that's always a big thing, that doesn't have to go through a long approval process. That's one thing.
Well, those two didn't have a very difficult approval process, did they?
They went through staff, and they went through a staff only process, somehow the staff approved both of them, I'm not
Well, they
sure
didn't-
how, but they did.
Did they violate,
But they don't meet any of the form-based codes, so
did they violate anything?
yeah, they violated most of the code.
Oh, did they? Again, I'd be curious.
Well, they were all supposed to be set front, fronting a road, they were all, they got variance, I mean, even the building up against the road, but the clubhouse is not with it's supposed, I mean, it's just.
Well, did they get variances from the Board of Adjustment? Well, they were just,
They just got approved.
I think
It's a past project.
the biggest problem was the one sort of closed off the parallel road that was.
oh, that was a different issue. That was,
Well-
somebody just
Well,
did
it's all in the
that.
code too.
No, I'm just saying, but once, I'm just saying, but once that was done, there wasn't a road for it to front on anymore.
I mean, the one's a flag lot to begin with, so it's not, but anyway, but moving forward, I mean, I think this is a good direction for us. I have enough money in our budget, I think. So we could work with Metters to kind of do some. Like maybe just in the code for each one of those unit types, so that wouldn't be too much, I don't think, for us to do.
And, if you do a separate design manual, maybe it would be a good idea for staff and the planning commission to periodically review the thing. Like once a year or once every couple of years. Because, as we've learned with this code, things evolve. Community needs change and, and that way there's some working together of the planning commission and the staff on an ongoing basis on that design manual.
I think if we're gonna do that, we would have. I don't know how far we can get in the next meeting, to the next meeting, but we can have matters here, it could be online, that's, or, talk about it.
And maybe the decision on a design manual, I mean, 'cause when I think about that, sometimes I think about it's adding time and money to the development process. And I guess I sort of grew up, was working at a time when we were trying to streamline and get things, efficient and get things done and and the idea of the design and standards, I don't know, when our guidance and the different 7 people and things turning over. We just don't want to add subjectivity. We do, I think, need to be cognizant of time it takes for development to go through, and that adds money as well. So again, back to that point about affordability, like that. And in terms of what's the most important in terms of a building, I think we should remember that the most important part is the first floor. What you see and feel when you're on the street, whether you're a pedestrian, a bicyclist, or in a vehicle. As you get further up on the building, I would say not as important, but that first floor, that interface between the public realm and the private realm is really, really important. And that's where, to me, any money should be invested. And then upper floor, above 3 and up, I mean, generally not even gonna be able to see it. Maybe in the case of some of these, the Carrington and all, I guess it's just because of its location, you can sort of look back and see it, but generally you're not gonna be able to do that. So first floor, very important, so if you're gonna spend money, time and money, that's where it should be, on that first floor.
Unless a taller building is screened somehow, or maybe the transition area. They're not that common here, they stick up, so I mean, they
Yeah,
call
but just-
attention to themselves.
Yeah, but again, as cities evolve, going from Alpharetta, from the courthouse and the upstairs, I mean, all communities evolve over time, and the whole southeast is where it's happening, so we need to be
Oh,
ready for it.
what's important about the evolution is, and we talked about this in one of our other work sessions. And that is that the planning commission really needs to be looking at planning for the future city. Where is it going and what should it be? And I think when we talk about each project comes in, looking master planning by looking at what's around it and how does it fit within the context of the area, not just TIAs, but architecturally and everything else. If we start doing it that way, I think that we're gonna have a much better focus for the planning commission. In other words, you start to take a look at what are the areas of influence as you come into Beaufort? And what are those nodes that make an impression on somebody coming in to Beaufort? And what does that mean? So we have corridors of influence is the way I say that. And so you have different corridors of influence that may have different different significant impacts to what you're trying to do. So that's a larger planning for the whole city. I think we get lost in the detail of things, and staff certainly does, because they're looking at individual projects with clients coming in and saying, this is what I want to do here. But what is that within the character of the context of the entire city? And I think if we have the ability to step back, it doesn't have to necessarily take more time. I think if we set up design guidelines that start to talk about all those things, maybe the staff has a better or an easier time when they're meeting with people coming in that want to try and develop something.
I think we can do it. I think we can have some money and we can work with Metters to kind of give you some design guidelines that are like pictures, et cetera, for each use type, if that makes sense to you. If we can try to maybe bring that back next time or the time after that, and kind of join, as a work session. And I think the reply to this is becoming more difficult is I think you're giving them the design, the predictability of design that, Bill would need. He was taking the thought, he can see like, well, looks like they want design number 6 here. If we designed design number 6, it would cut down a lot of time. I think the challenge is with affordability. How do we carve it out? Say that you have to have a certain amount, or what do we do? I think that's what we need to think.
Well, and the other issue is, I really think it's important to not try to make the whole entire town look like the historic district. The idea of, it's a growing and vibrant community. you know, that's design diversity. And, you know, not that everybody loves a historic district, but not everything has to look like it would fit in there.
I think that's a very good point. And to be honest with you and listening to what Mike said, I think what also occurred on the diversity that we want shouldn't all only rely on different types of housing, residential buildings. I think what you said in the very beginning is important too. You want to create new communities and kind of emphasize nodes that we want to build up, but then you have to have diversity in uses as well. Not only multifamily, they may look differently and they may have the diversity in architecture, but you also want to make sure that you have residential and commercial and different uses within that new, whatever you're building there, right?
I don't know so much. I didn't say much, and we'll get to that, but I think that these acreages that you had here were pretty small acreages. These are not, 20 acres doesn't make a community. You know,
For
I mean,
that purpose, not, that was more regarding
you
the
know,
residential, housing type,
Residential
the housing type diversity, yeah.
I mean, single family subdivision developers want to build single family homes. They don't want to build apartments. An apartment guy isn't gonna be building single family homes. It's not what they are. They're distinct things. And that's the way they're gonna come to you. And the same way is true with a retail development. You're gonna get once in a while, once in 100 years, you're gonna get we were talking about it earlier, but what they call it Habersham here, or we had it called Norton Commons, which is probably the biggest and most successful in the country. It's in Kentucky. Ion and Charleston, those are very unique mixed use communities, but they're, 100, 200, 300 acre type communities.
Right.
I don't know that you can have a mixed use community with 20 acres. And I don't know in Beaufort, I mean, for example, your little subdivision, how many acres do you think the whole thing was? Midtown or City Walk, yeah.
10, I was gonna say 10.
Yeah, I think
10 or 10?
10.
Yeah,
Minus.
It's 46 small lots.
yeah. I mean, I don't think you can make a mixed use community out of something like that. or
I would
even-
disagree. I think I can, because one, we don't have the acreage, because there's a limited amount of property space here. There's just limited amount of developable area, right? It's just the way the city is. But two, when you look at the list, you could just do cottages and then detached house, or you could do a townhouse, or you could do a duplex with that, just 20 or 30% of it. I think you can. I mean, I know D.R. Horton.
Well, I don't think you're
They
gonna,
build townhouses and, or they can build a cottage and they can.
you're not gonna get a mixed use in the context of a retail and residential.
Well, this
So
was
it's
for
gonna be
residential.
substantial and says Newport wasn't even large enough to have
No,
a
it's good
vibrant
to have the option.
retail community.
Sure. It's good to have the option, but yeah, this is for residential.
I'm just saying, I wouldn't require it unless you got to real large acreages.
Yeah, it's just an allowance that you could throw, commercial use out there.
Oh,
It's for residential, it's not for commercial.
That's
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, if the idea is to allow for it.
You could
but not
allow it, if you
require it, then I
allow
think that's
any other
fine.
use, if you have to
I think
have
that's
a
fine.
mixture of uses, so if you're gonna build an apartment complex of a certain size, that's gonna be a few hundred units, it's 10 acres, right? I could probably fit, 400 or 500 apartments in there. Then I have to have 30% as something else. It could be commercial, it could be resident, it could be townhouses, it could be houses, it could be whatever, right? Cottages.
Whether it's, my point was if it's allowed, it's one thing, if it's required, it's another, and I don't know where you were going with that.
Would be required, the thought is to kind of make it more urban. So we don't have these islands. Density or islands of no density.
I guess a good example would be that development that we reviewed that was going to be behind Walmart. I think that was more than 20 acres and they basically only have one single housing type, which is giant multi.
Well, that's all you're gonna get there.
Yeah.
But is that what we want? That's the question. Is that what the city wants, right?
But so. 20 units per acre is pretty high, it's a real high density. You know, I mean, you can't, it's pretty hard, unless you're doing over 3 stories, you can't get above. You can barely get to 20 dwelling units per acre with 3 stories. Now you're going to 4 stories, which means elevators, 5 stories, obviously.
Different code requirements.
Those are all different code requirements, and I mean, the people who are coming forward with apartment developments, that's what they are, they are a single use developer, they're not both. You know,
And that's fine, then they have to do both, they will, because I know, because this is what Fort Collins did like years
the
ago,
apartment
and it works,
developers
it
are not,
works. They
the
basically.
apartment developers are different than the single
Yeah, and
family
that's
developers.
not our problem,
Well,
they need
that
to,
was-
they need to coordinate, so they'll phase it out, they'll
Do they
phase it out.
partner up with somebody
they'll
else?
phase-
Well, if you got enough acreage,
They always.
so if, well,
Well, we all need to think about this.
I'm just telling you what the market realities are about
I
things.
think Kurt put
Yeah.
forward something that he thinks might be a good idea. I have a set of design guidelines that is, can be used as a template to use. I'll be glad to let you all make copies of that and take a look at it. I think they're pretty good design guidelines, actually. One of the things it did was, it defined an overlay, a design overlay. And what that meant this particular place was that the guidelines for those designs were contained within those boundary areas, and that identified, you know, what the design guidelines were for that. Anything outside of the boundaries of that, then kind of open game until the city decided to expand those guidelines. That might be something else that we want to take a look at.
Like, where are your, what area were your design guidelines from?
That's from Alpharetta.
Alpharetta, okay.
That was sort of the way that, one of the really early codes was they had whatever highway corridor overlay districts. And so the design standards just applied onto the main corridor. So let's say if you're doing something, even retail on Mossy Oaks Road or whatever, it wouldn't apply, so.
And so I think
Change.
we can get information from the way it was developed here, which was different than development around Atlanta. And how those two can be combined so that we can set our sights out a little bit farther for what we want to try and accomplish.
It would also be interesting, I don't know if you have the inventory of this, as to, because how much undeveloped, you know, land, yeah, and what parcel sizes are we even talking about in Beaufort? If we were talking about the entire county, that would, you know, it might be a different thing. I mean, what you're seeing in Hardyville in the newspapers and stuff, these, you know, several 100-acre communities are different. We're not gonna see any of that kind
For
of
now,
stuff.
yes, but that may change, you never know
Oh,
with
yeah, with
annexation. and
annexation in the future.
Well,
going upwards towards US 21, like that one developer was presenting his grand subdivision plan for Seabrook, for the Seabrook community. Never know, I mean.
That's exactly right. I don't know what the appetite for city council is. I know I've been involved with cities and city councils that didn't want to expand their boundaries. And it was unfortunate that they didn't, but they just felt like we could only afford to support a certain distance, and I think this city council feels the same way. Whether or not they're gonna even take in Seabrook or let the county do it, I think it's a mistake to let the county do it, but
my point is if because of annexation, you suddenly have large acre tracts, well, that changes everything. Then some of these ideas of mixed use communities, you know, are, you know, really do work. But if we're talking about so little acreage and if we don't even have 20 acres, anything more than 20 acres in this town, then some of these ideas of mixed use communities, I just think are impractical.
Well, they would only be triggered with, if you hit that acreage anyway, so they wouldn't even.
And that's when we get to that section, we talk about what the acreage threshold is.
I mean, we
because-
can think about that.
that
I will
one-
tell you that every apartment complex now in certain areas now have, you know, apartments, or I mean, townhouses, or have, you know, different style of development with them, and, you know, it's a different price point.
Have you all seen that kind of interest when you're on Arjan Boulevard? that funny little community that has big apartments and then they got these teeny houses.
Yeah.
See these
Like
things?
900 square feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's an all rental community, is it?
Oh, yeah, I've heard about
We've driven
Argent
through.
cottages, is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's
Cottages to
Yeah,
rent.
they're about
basically.
900 square feet.
Yeah, that could be.
that one is unique.
I think we're right there at the stoplight.
It is at a stoplight, I think.
Yeah,
Drive in there some days, cause it's like,
it's really neat. And they're all various colors.
Oh, that, yeah, you
Yeah,
can see it.
it's like the Seven Sisters.
So that's a rental?
It's
I mean,
really-
you'll have a 1-story next to a 3-story.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, we're talking about diversity of everything there.
So can we take a 5-minute break while Kirk goes to get the
Yeah, I'm
summary?
gonna go print all those.
Does anybody have any idea how many acres this Salem Bay
A lot.
facility?
I think it was 99.
Okay,
Just the single family part?
the single family part over on the left-hand side as you're going down.
It was just below the level of actually being required to do a traditional neighborhood design, which later, but it would have been optional. Optional to do something different, but
Well, it feels like the form-based code kind of intended to do all these things. It
Yeah.
just didn't. Right, and I think maybe that was from staffing or direction of it, but somehow just didn't. It's a great, you know, I think Paul, as Paul stated, you know, there's a framework there, like, that can work, it's just, it just didn't. It needed more, right, it needed some revisions.
I think we'll learn a lot, let's say, in terms of designs guidelines, do we want to meet them by going through these chapters 2, 3, and 4 and seeing what's really in there? Has it been applied? And if it was applied, you know, would it have been better? Would it work? And then what needs to be changed? So I think before we rush into saying now we need a whole nother document to create, administer, and enforce, let's see what we got. And then when we make all the adjustments,
Yeah,
we might feel pretty good. Then we can see how that works and then we still need
I
something
would, I
else.
agree. I think I'd like
Yeah.
to see as much as we can to keep it within the document that we have, rather than writing another whole document.
Yeah, I thought that's what I was summarizing, it sounded like we could definitely do that even with Meadows, is we could add some
A little more. specific.
design guidelines to each of those use types.
Yeah.
Bring that back to a work session.
Yeah.
But I think you're seeing what. You've all been on the DRB or the planning commission, you've had these conversations with all these projects. And you see what the code is requiring and what it didn't require. Flexibility and the lack of flexibility, I think you're seeing that with all these, I mean, all of these projects you guys have done. All but maybe.
Well, I think there's a happy medium between having enough information and what's restrictive. And I think the developers want more information than what we're giving them right now, quite frankly. They would rather see, you know, what are you after, what do you really want?
Yeah.
And, but they don't want to be so tied down with restrictions
Yeah.
that it costs them an arm and a leg.
Yeah, we don't want
So-
like state variances for like, you know, cornices or something, you know, like some of this code, when the form-based code first came out, I know in Kentucky. Cause I was there, Bill, like I think Owensboro especially, a few other cities, they were taking like each project would have like 60 variances for every like specific minor little thing. And then, so what happened is they just, you know, they just repealed them. A lot of those codes out.
Well,
Because
the Kentucky statute on what is allowed, its variance statute only applies to dimensions.
Yeah.
Whereas our variance statute in South Carolina applies to just about everything, which is ridiculous. And so already in our code that we just revised, we give the Board of Zoning Adjustment, you're basically the backdoor authority to undo everything that we do, which is ridiculous, I think. We tried to fix that a little bit, but the statute, this whole idea of exceptions, because they got the authority to deal with design exceptions. You know, which that's unusual, actually, in terms of state codes that I'm familiar with.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break? Let you guys.
Yes. Makes a lot of fun.
Your hand. Yeah, just do you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, the staff
Okay, get us back, I guess.
And, you know, I mean, tell us a street or a neighborhood or.
Oh,
something,
okay, like the real world
just
example.
because then we can sort of, most of us can then picture it in our mind.
Okay, it's a little after 3. Where does the board want to go from here? Do you want to try and start with chapter 2? Do you want to try and take the information that we've already got today and regroup at our next work session? What would the board like to do?
Would you have preference on which of the chapters you think we should start with? Or?
I would suggest starting at 2 and 3, seeing chapter 2, you probably should start at.
What they can order, 2, 3, and
I
4.
think we had a good overview and talk about chapter 4, and I think we got some marching orders in that, we can bring that forward, back to you, but 2 and 3. Or if you want to hear Paul, some of his ideas, or talk about anything you had that's specific that we should work on. Chapter 2, whatever, it's your pleasure.
The one thing about 2 is a lot of diversity proposal, and that sort of relates to 3 with the uses, right? Because if we're talking about allowing 2 and 3 family, for example, and T3S, and, you know, I don't know, so we could start with 2, but we may have to. The other thing, lot diversity, that's a big topic, right, that by itself, and I'm not saying it's not a good topic, but I'm just wondering if there's things in here that time is of the essence, we really gotta get them done, if just that concept's gonna take.
I don't think anything is of the essence. I think what's probably of the essence is just for you all to decide what you'd like to focus on so we can tailor.
Well, I don't think you were gonna take 2, 3, and 4 back to council until you had them all done together.
Yeah, I think they all tie into each other.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like it's gonna be easier actually than the last chapters. They seem to be a little easier to.
unlike SDUs and STRs and ADUs, which was sort of a rush. This would all be done at once.
I think rolling out.
Yeah. So in that sense, maybe you just start from the beginning and go to the end.
Yeah, if you want to do the beginning, or if there's things that you all think that we should be working on, like, we should talk about them now, and, you know, we need to add them to the draft, like, you know, I don't know what.
One question I had is, Mike, maybe tell us, is there any developments on the collaboration between planning commission and the historic review board?
Oh, that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The formerly high priority, happy to be done.
Well, the city council is seeing fit to go ahead and put together, ask her to put together information about what the board should look like, who should be on the board, that kind of thing. And so in my talking to each of the city council and the mayor, I have asked them to add Bill to that board because of his legal experience with land. Because I think that's going to become very, very important as we move forward through it. Is it the next city council meeting, Kurt, that they're going to go ahead and adopt your
Has this setup of it, yeah.
Okay.
14th, I think.
Yes, it's the ad hoc group that's now a task force, I guess, that's been set up. We had a meeting last week again, and I'm not sure that we got anywhere, quite frankly, and maybe getting exacerbated in another couple of meetings. So we've had a lot of meetings, and we go around in circles a lot, but I will say I've learned a lot, and at the the same time. And, what I'd like to do, is do some kind of a comprehensive, listing of all the funding resource possibilities, for all of this. I think that what we decided at our last meeting, that I don't think that the city is going to fund necessarily these projects. They may have some funding available, but I think funding is gonna come from other sources. So I think this task force is gonna be kind of running adjunct to the city, because of the ability, or inability to get certain funding. And so, that's the part that's gonna develop. The part that we have related to the code is, a little bit muddy in my head yet. I think we have some draft language. Kurt, I think you even put together some draft language, and I put some.
Yeah, you recommended draft language.
Yeah, and I had put together some draft language too. But I don't think we're to that point. The problem is that, I don't want to put something in the code that isn't gonna be actually implemented. In other words, if it comes down to taking for some reason of some property, for 30 years, we haven't done that. And so, we have to figure out, if that's really gonna happen or not, if the city council is gonna actually do something with that.
It sounds like
I don't know the
chicken and
answer to
egg
that.
problem.
Well, it is kind of. That's why this task force, I think, is gonna be running, a little bit outside of the city purview, but still has to be associated with the city. The task force won't have any, authority, in front of potential, funding sources if we're not attached, if it's not attached to the city. So the city has to, kind of adopt task force and run with it
So
in
these
some manner.
funding sources that you're talking about, are they grants that developers apply for? Are they special kind of loans that developers apply for, or homeowners, or?
There are loans and there's, grants, I have a list of about 11 different potential funding sources.
Does the city have to be involved with that?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, but I think that the task force needs to be backed by, the city.
So other than that, what is it, the $2,500 allowance, the repair allowances, that's money the city has, the rest of them are private or other government
Yeah.
sources, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, plus, there are opportunities out there for people to, invest privately also. And then those are other opportunities, so to speak. But I think one of the big issues is that HBF has kind of loosened its grip a little bit on some of the, properties that are health safety concerns at this point. And I think it's a process of going through making decisions.
Things that many would say should have been torn down long ago, but they're not worth saving.
I think that's a TBD,
Yeah,
I think.
well, and unfortunately, things that the city has invested money in to stabilize, which are completely unstabilized again now. So, I don't know, that's not much of an update, but city council at least is going to vote on a task force coming up. And Kurt's written a real good document, for establishing the task force.
So would it be possible in the work of this task force, which we assume is going to be created, to separate out the code revision and the opportunities for
It has
financing.
to be,
Yeah,
it has to be.
maybe do the code first, even if it has to be changed later, just get it done, so the code revision project.
I agree. I mean, 'cause it's a lot of what this task force has decided wants to take on are real long-term kind of things.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to prioritize, you know, I was gonna talk to you a little bit after about, because otherwise they're not gonna get a sense of accomplishing anything if they wait to accomplish it all at once. And so far, it's just, Dick has been very good at throwing out a lot of really good funding things, but Dick, they're just, also in the conversation, there seems to be a lot of just, I don't know.
Complications.
Complications. So,
Yeah,
and he's focusing more on the financing, right, and funding and how to satisfy these various funding agencies and stuff. That's gonna be a long-term challenge. And a lot of that, you know, comes down to these heirs properties, which is not an easy solution, right? And may never get solved, you know, except one property at a time, over time.
Well, and that's a
But it all,
statewide problem as well,
Right.
it's not
Yeah.
just Beaufort.
and the whole thing started because we needed to write a code section and we didn't know what exactly to say and how to satisfy people. And then this thing just morphed into something a lot
Right.
larger, right? So
Well,
I think.
we wrote a good code section, it wasn't received. It was considered too restrictive.
but anyhow, I think we still have to work on the code.
Yeah.
Okay, I just don't, in my opinion, I don't think we're at the point where we can go ahead and do that code and get it accepted, you know, through city council. So I think we need to get a little bit farther in the process.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm trying to do, is get far enough into the process so we can actually write a code that's accepted by city council, and that they'll actually live by.
Well, if the city council is happy with the code, with that part of the code as it is. Right, I mean, it's up to them, you know, maybe take it off our list for now. And, you know, we tried, they're not ready to change it, they wanna keep what they have, and, great, go for it.
Well, it isn't change, the old, what is it, section, what is the section,
Yeah.
9.11,
9.10.
and we had 11, you know, those that were operating under the existing. That we ever come up with something.
Right, and if there's no strong feeling that it needs to be changed. That's okay, I mean, you know, we have our private opinions about it, but it's not up to us.
Well, no, I'd like to get a little bit farther to see if we can't get something done. So that when we write that part of the code, that it's actually something that can be implemented. If we can't, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll just do what we can. And that will bring it back to you, to the board here, and you all take a look at it.
Is there like 10 different opinions on every single point, or is there a way to come up with like just a?
The issue on the code is a totally separate issue from what the task force is trying.
I'm talking about the code. Are there, I mean, do they totally oppose?
The city council?
No,
It's not at all clear. I
The
would say.
historic review board.
Oh, I don't think they don't even know what it is at this point.
Okay, so the city doesn't like the changes that.
Yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought it
Yeah,
was.
so,
Is that right, Kurt? Council didn't like our changes or something.
I'm not really entirely sure myself.
And I don't think-
Move forward.
Having sat through, you know, half dozen of these meetings, I don't think I can determine what the people who've been in the meeting think about it either. It's just been a lot of talk. And it's been informative, but I don't think that it's been at all clear, like even the people with strong opinions feel.
yeah,
I don't know
Well,
why.
if it's the city that doesn't like our changes, maybe they could identify for us what they don't like. And send us back to the drawing board on it.
That's the problem.
Okay.
but let's
There's a lot of
just let the
schizophrenia
task
in the whole
force
thing.
go forward
Well, stay tuned.
for some more meetings, because the task force has not been established yet. And we don't have people from the community as on the task force yet. And so that's a problem. We need to have people from the community on the task force. I think that's gonna help us determine how to write that code section too. Because if they're standing up against it, then that's problematic for the city council too. So I'd like to go a little farther. Let's get a meeting or two under our belts with the people from the community as part of the task force.
And those people have been nominated for the task force?
There's already been documents sent out asking for people that want to be involved in the task force to come forward and get interviewed by city council.
No, that has not.
Yeah.
Not until they.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, not until they.
It's just the resolution.
So what's the
Yeah.
purpose of this task force?
We have an ad hoc.
They've got a purpose actually written and you ought to send it out
We
to
have an
everybody.
ad hoc committee, and then we have a task force.
you got it all set out.
The other.
that's all.
Kurt, it went before the council, they approved the purpose, right?
No, not yet.
Oh.
No, it'll be, well, next week,
Oh, that thing that you wrote and that was,
It has not gone.
oh, that hasn't.
It was next Tuesday, then they'll start the application process and then they'll.
If you wouldn't mind just distributing that. to
Yeah.
The board.
I would guess it's probably gonna
Once,
be
I
adopted.
mean, once they approve.
It's not controversial. It
No.
took 6 meetings to come up with that. And I think,
Well, you just let us know whenever it's time for us to.
Or
We'll be right here.
you can go to those meetings instead of us.
or your successors.
Kind of frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, we'll have to create like a schedule. They don't create a schedule. You've seen from the other committees, it'll go on forever. Whatever.
Let's talk about ADUs STRs since you
Yeah, that's
guys
okay. I was
are
just gonna
wanting
ask
to
about that, yeah.
get
Change the
it.
subject.
Okay, so I've been in contact with each of the city council and the mayor about that, and they don't agree with having all owner occupied, kind of the way we were going that direction. And
For the SDRs.
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
and so they think it might be unconstitutional. And so they it hasn't been put before the city council yet.
It'll be next week. Next week. Be
Yeah,
the work session next week.
yeah. But in talking to council members, they believe that it can be possibly made constitutionally acceptable if we go ahead and allow a single STR for an investor. That way, somebody could go ahead and make an investment that wants to move here when they retire. And then they can have that investment until they retire, and then they can move into the building, or they could sell it. But they think that if we adjust the information around to allow for a single STR investor owned.
Is there a time limit, like they have to sign an affidavit, I will move?
That's
No,
out there.
no, there wouldn't be anything like that.
Whose opinion was this? The
Uh,
city attorney, I guess.
Well, I don't know.
You
don't hear much from the city attorney, frankly. I've never seen a single opinion that he's written.
Whose opinion was it? Was it a written opinion?
I've not heard it.
No,
It's from my.
I really don't
It was
want it.
a general and coherent fear of unconstitutionality.
So anyhow,
I don't know.
that's what city council, I guess they're gonna have a discussion when it comes up before them this time. And my suggestion was that maybe we get another joint session between city council and the planning commission to finalize whatever direction we seem to be wanting to go with ADUs and STRs. It seemed like it would make more sense for us to just have a joint session. So I don't know if they will do that or not, but I know that that's the issue that'll come up, when it does come up before in the next, well, tomorrow,
Next Tuesday.
next
It
Tuesday.
seems,
Well,
So that investor, having a single property. I'm just going through my mind all the ways that you can
I know,
boondoggle that.
I know.
You could have
I
somebody
know.
set up separate
I
legal
understand.
entities, one for each.
Exactly.
I know,
I mean, that's,
I understand.
that's just,
Hey, you got a future practice idea here?
that would be obvious to anybody.
Yeah,
Yeah, there'd be a lot of ways to game that.
That's what was mentioned to me in conversations, that seems to, that would make this thing move forward, but,
how does that benefit the neighborhoods? I'm just. That could, I mean, why is it good in,
well, everything else in state, you read all the information that they had, right? But maintaining 6% and all the other regulations they have. That would still be in there.
Are they enforcing the 6%?
Uh,
Are they enforcing it?
But isn't it,
yeah,
they're doing it in kind of a weird way, right? Like
Yeah, we'll see, because I mean, the code,
6%
the higher
per
rate.
property versus per unit or
Could be
something like
cows.
that.
They just don't do, just do the same code. We'll see if they go forward with that and they just don't take your recommendation on owner and occupied, they can do that.
yeah,
That's an easy path forward.
I wouldn't
I
mind
don't
if they reduce the 6% down to 4%, quite frankly, I don't know. And the 300 feet is another issue with some people, I think, but
What was the 300 feet?
spacing
spacing,
between us?
oh, you can't have an SDR within 300 feet of the SDR.
No, one alternative that would be less onerous than owner occupied would be to require the owner to live
In the
in
city.
the county or something. Or hire a professional management company.
Well, they already have a professional management company included in that. But I thought maybe it would be good to have the owner be within the city of Beaufort, but that didn't seem to fly.
Your reasons are just because they didn't like the idea.
Probably legal reason, I don't know.
Well, they had that lady, the lady came and she talked about how she and her husband, they live locally, but they have some short-term rentals and they meticulously maintain them, and that was pretty compelling, I have to say.
Yeah.
Grandfather, so you own,
Yeah,
Yeah,
she
yeah,
wouldn't
I
have
know
affected,
something's
you know, she,
no harm, no foul,
right.
but.
I don't know, is it possible to do like a 4% owner occupied and 8% everybody else?
I don't understand.
So 4% of.
Oh, percent.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find out.
Well, I don't think it'd be 4 and 2,
If
we'd have to
anybody else
see.
has ever raised this constitutional issue, I'm not familiar with it, so I'm gonna find out if any other communities been researched.
It only,
I
the
just gotta
only
find
issue
out.
I can think of was maybe somebody, well. But setting aside people who are grandfathered going forward. I don't see how it's a constitutional issue.
Yeah. Prevents
I just
Me.
don't.
from doing.
Well, you're
something
the
in
attorney,
future
I'm not.
different.
That's just what was brought up.
The
by-
constructive taking,
But taking is what I was thinking
yeah,
about.
but
it's-
if the only, your argument, the only thing you can use it for is a short-term rental.
As
Not
long as
really,
you're-
you could
as
do
long as
a
you're
long-term rental, you
grandfathered,
could do,
it's not gonna be a
You can live there.
If your grandfather to people, there's no taking,
No
it's a
taking,
new
okay.
rule going forward, this is. Who's zoning rules and those kind of regulations change all the time.
It would be an equal protection issue.
and we're talking about a license, right, which is,
No, we're
not
not talking about,
to have a short-term rental is a new license.
well, yeah, but the way we dealt with it, we've done it as a, within the zoning code. Code, and then once it's determined whether you're legal or illegal, if you're legal, then there's a whole licensing procedure you go through. So the issue that they're saying is, and I'm guessing people raise, say, oh, it could be unconstitutional without having a clue of what they're talking about. To really know,
Yeah.
somebody's gonna have to have gone through an equal protection, analysis on this, and it just didn't strike me as that. That's why I'm gonna find out in some other communities whether anybody's researched it, because I'm sure that they've limited it to owner occupied in other places.
Yeah, Greenville is one, Charleston.
Yeah.
And they're single family districts.
Yeah,
But
Sure
if
they
if you frame it as a license, nobody's entitled to a license.
no, but it,
And so the.
but we
if
don't
you
frame
Do
it
it that way, but we could do it that way, and that would eliminate any unconstitutionality.
Well,
Well, maybe it's.
I'll be presenting it next Tuesday, so,
At the work session,
we'll see, yeah, at the work session.
what time is that?
5 o'clock in this room.
Do they publish agendas for those work sessions?
Yeah,
I don't see anything online for that.
yeah.
Oh, it hasn't been, but it doesn't
They're
get
not
published until
budgeted
Thursday or
advance.
Friday. I haven't even done it.
Yeah.
That's tomorrow.
No,
Wait,
we-
oh, it's tomorrow?
No, it hasn't been released yet. Usually it's Thursday.
I thought you said it was next Tuesday.
The most recent city council agenda online is from July. Wow.
Yeah,
They,
I saw
Are
that
you
too.
looking at
they've
the
been
design?
having a lot of problems with the new program. I know. We've been having a lot of problems. with it.
That is front.
Look at that, the most recent city council agenda that's online is July 15th.
Yeah.
Who needs information?
It's
I'm
all
being facetious.
about transparency. Are we still online?
I think they're having a lot of issues with. We're having issues putting it up.
The old program worked just jiffy on the spot, man. It worked great. I don't know why they
It's one of
changed it.
those your software gets updated. You can't use it for anything for a week.
We're here to help.
Yeah.
I know that with all our agendas.
Talk to AI.
We've been having it all the time.
Well, did everybody get Kurt's memo that has the information on that he's gonna present?
With the SDRs.
Yes.
Well, I have to
Oh,
revise
yes,
it.
yeah.
You know, I presented it last time, right? We talked about it last time.
I think so. I know, I have a copy of it.
I missed the
wasn't there.
language.
I wasn't
Yeah,
there.
both of us
Would you
missed.
mind, are you gonna revise it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably make some little slight revisions tomorrow and, it'll get sent out on probably Thursday or Friday.
You mind just sending out to the board? Sure. I'll have a copy of it. Anybody has any questions or issues, call either Kurt or myself. Maybe call Kurt and then you can call me.
Don't put yourself out there like that.
Just like talking to us like.
Is there anything else anybody has?
Wanna talk about some of Paul's stuff, or-
Yeah, Paul, do you wanna?
I'll leave that to your discretion. I'm here at your convenience. I can come back to the next meeting. I'm happy to go over and answer any questions. Couple of my issues are sitting in the parking lot, and that's fine for now. If you want to go through the code as I've seen you do before, step by step, and starting with number 2, then as my issues come up, I'll be glad to be here and respond however you want to handle it, sir.
Okay. Yeah. I'd rather have you interact with us as we're going through it so that.
I'm happy to do that. That's what I was hoping would, I was planning on that today, but if that doesn't work, I'll be here next time.
Okay. If they're not, just send us a memo and we'll have that discussion. I found it.
I'll do that.
Anything anybody else has? We didn't get started on 2, and I thought
Are we
we'd be
gonna
done.
start on 2 or let it ride or?
I would let it ride, because I really want to spend some time, now that I've got this summary, I'd really like to just lock myself up for an hour or 2 and go through these carefully.
I feel for you.
I look forward to it, Kurt. I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
Yeah, I've done my markups, but I didn't have this either, and I want to go through that. as
And the
well.
overview that Kurt
The
gave us.
The
overview.
overview is very helpful.
Yeah.
Already picked out things I wanted to express.
I don't know, he's right. I have-
Anything anybody else has?
What is the schedule for the next meeting?
Okay, so it's next meeting, so I understand, we try to work, we'll start working with members to come up with start coming up with some design guidelines for use types, and then we'll also maybe come up with a little presentation, a little separate kind of presentation on the block diversity thing. That's what I heard. Or just want to be on.
You take a look at that document I gave you. That was-
Yeah, we made copies of it.
So we,
Got it.
are you covered the Alpharetta?
And then we'll start on chapter 2, so that's,
Yeah.
Are you gonna, send that around to us?
yeah, we made a copy.
Yeah,
so
we
we
do that.
can,
Okay, that would be good. You can email it.
Oh, we get to make a copy right now.
Whatever you would like. I mean, I can email it to you, I can scan it in and email it as an attached PDF or
It's
whatever.
not that thick, right?
No, it's 30 pages of it.
If it would be possible, then and then we could look at that while we're going through. If we could,
Hard copies.
yeah,
Okay.
So maybe next time to not be too ambitious, maybe we should start with the framework for the design thing, but start with chapters 2 and 3, and then the second half be like maybe an hour on.
Yeah,
Starting with a framework for design guidelines within the. And
yeah,
I'll invite
yeah.
Jeremy to that, so let's set aside like an hour. Does that make sense? And then the rest we can work on. Chapters 2 and 3.
That sounds good.
And then 4 is probably gonna need its own work session.
Next meeting is the 20th, Monday, the 20th of October. That's our next meeting.
Oh, it's the planning commission. You want to do that at the planning commission, or you going to do that?
Planning.
That was my question.
You could do it at the planning. I mean, we have a Whitehall project. It's, because, today is the 6th, so third Monday. The next week will be the 13th, and so the third Monday is 20th.
Gives you some cases.
Yeah, we can, on the 20th, maybe we can start on chapter 2 and 3, because I won't have a design guideline. It'll have to be the next work. So I don't think I can get that all.
The next work session, do we have a date for that?
How it's.
Make it easy for
What day would it be?
First Monday of each month, right?
First Monday or third? Okay, so November 3rd is the next work session, but you want to plan on, we'll start on chapter 2 and 3 of the planning commission. We'll have Whitehall, that'll be the first item. Just put chapter 2 on there,
On this next one, what happened, White
on the
House?
20th, yeah.
I think that since we haven't even discussed chapter 2 yet, that the regular meeting is not a great setting to do it. I really think we need to spend some time in the work session. So,
Actually, it's not much.
yeah, I think it's much more productive to do it in the work session.
We don't have another work session until what date?
October 3rd.
The third.
Or
November
November 3rd.
November
Third,
3rd.
third. So the only thing we have at the next planning commission meeting is the Whitehall project.
Talk about the general things, I guess, if you'd like.
That might be
Chapter
good.
2, 3.
Yeah, if you all get a chance to read what it is being printed now,
That would be good.
then we could just
Okay,
have a general discussion. Because that's not out of Beaufort, but it has enough information that we could talk about.
And we could give staff some guidance
Yeah,
on next steps, and that's like
yeah,
that's an isolated piece. It's easy to talk about as opposed to the freewheeling discussions with random public comment that doesn't even pertain to the thing we're talking about. But it should be included in if we're gonna put it on the agenda, we should include it in the agenda packet.
Okay, yeah, I'll put discussion and all that other stuff, and then for the next November 3rd work session, unless you want to meet. Probably that's not a good idea. We'll have an hour set aside for the starting on the design guidelines, see if you're liking what we're doing, and we'll have matters on for that, and then the rest of it will be chapters 2 and 3. I don't think we'll get to that. If we get to 4, we get to 4. I think we'd be ambitious.
We should start at 8 o'clock.
So the regular meeting, on Monday evening will not pertain to 2 and 3. That would be reserved for the next work session?
That's right.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, November the 3rd.
okay.
My granddaughter is going to the debutante ball.
I'm happy for her. I don't know.
With the Citadel.
Are you gonna be escorting?
Are you a chaperone?
I am gonna be there.